The discussion is guided today by an article, although I would not say under any means do you have to be fully prepared to participate today. The kinds of topics that we're going to be talking about and what I'll share, I think should likely resonate with just about everyone here that is participating, and you don't need to have done your homework for this to be engaging today. So Casey is helping me out though in reposting the link to the article. So should this conversation interest you and you want to read more and you haven't had the chance to yet, the link is in the chat box. So my name is, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle Thornton. I am a professor in the School of Business, and I am a former accessibility fellow, as well as a member of the work group on accessibility practices. Today's session is part of our 5-day accessibility challenge. And for those of you who are participating, that is an asynchronous challenge with some synchronous sessions built in. And we are happy to have you joining us here this afternoon. So the title of the article that we're going to be talking about is called From Accommodation to Accessibility, Creating a Culture of Inclusivity. And I really feel like this article sort of sets the stage or gives context to some of the reasons why we decided to even host an accessibility challenge here at Oswego. And the first thing that I want to do whenever I'm trying to think about a discussion or culture is I'd love to just go around and have everyone introduce themselves as well. If you could just tell us what your name is, what role you have on campus, and if you have any previous experience with accessibility, say you participated in one of our challenges in the past or gone to any trainings. And if not, that's no problem. Let us know that too. So on my screen, right next to me, I've got Michael. If you wouldn't mind going next, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. My name is Michael Chanis, and this is my 3rd year at SUNY Oswego, but I guess I'll say it for everyone. The last 18 months feel like longer. It feels like I've been here longer than 3 years, truth be told. But one of the great advantages, I work in anthropology and Native American studies. I'm the director of Native American studies. But one of the advantages of the distant learning was that I got to become involved with the accessibility community here at SUNY Oswego. And so I've participated in the 5-day and the 10-day challenge before, and I'll be participating in this 5-day challenge. And I'm also working with Casey for the next year. I'll be one of the accessibility fellows here at SUNY Oswego. So I am committed to, fostering and cultivating that community of accessibility here at the university. Michelle, do you want me to call on someone next, or do you want to take it?
That'd be great.
Okay, right on. Then Mary, you're next on my screen. Would you introduce yourself next?
Hi, I'm Mary McGowan, and I'm in the School of Business. I'm a visiting assistant professor of business law. Visiting is an interesting term because I've been at SUNY Oswego since 1996. Many of you probably weren't even born then. But anyway, so it's been a long visit. And obviously during that time, I've seen lots of changes. And one of the things is trying to keep myself up to date, which is a constant challenge for all of us. And so that's why I'm here today. And I know Michelle, I know she does great things. So
thanks.
I'll call on Karen.
Hi, I'm an associate professor in the biological sciences department. I teach various zoology classes. And this is my first time doing one of these accessibility challenges. And I'm here mainly just to kind of get practical advice and tips for making my classes as accessible as necessary. I teach mostly in person. I avoid remote learning when possible, but obviously I use Blackboard and other sites. And so trying to, figure out the standards for that is kind of what I'm looking for. Thanks. Oops.
Thanks, Karen. Casey, you want to go next?
So I'm Casey Raymond. I'm in the chemistry department. Been at Oswego 18 years now, and I was in the first cohort of faculty accessibility fellows, and I will be leading this year's group of accessibility fellows. I'm also on the work group. So, Christine Clay.
Hi, thank you. My name is Christine Clay. I'm Assistant Director of Graduate Studies here at Oswego. This is my first accessibility challenge. And for me, I feel like one of the things that I need to do with prospective students and with current students is help make sure that for them, Oswego is a place where they can take advantage of everything they need to be able to learn and to get involved with the campus community. And so I want to make sure that in all of my communications and any digital outreach that we're doing with folks, and then anything else that we're doing with people in their physical space, that we're making sure that everybody has access to everything they need on campus. Oh, so sorry. I'm going to call my colleague, Chris Dallas.
Hi, Chris Dallas here. I have been at SUNY Oswego for a little over 7 years. I've been in graduate studies for about 2.5 years. And this is my first accessibility challenge participation. So I just want to learn about it. If there's anything I can do to try and help make anything I provide or do more accessible to those that need it. How about Anna?
Hey, I'm a HCI grad student and I'm the grad assistant in the CELT office. So I'm here to make sure the Zoom slides run smoothly, but I also have an interest in accessibility and just recently joined the accessibility work group. And I think Dan's the only one left.
Hi, my name is Dan Laird. I have been on campus for 14 years with Campus Technology Services, and I joined the accessibility work group back in 2017, and I'm around to help anybody with any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
So great to see a good kind of mix of people here, folks that have been part of these groups before and folks that are brand new, as well as from a pretty good cross section of spaces on campus. So thank you all for being here. I am going to start by sharing my screen here just to highlight a couple of key takeaways from the articles that will get us started. And then I'll probably be toggling between sharing and not sharing so that we can kind of see each other as well. So if you give me 1 second here, we'll. All right. Can I get a thumbs up? Anna, can you see the slides? Great. Awesome. All right. Thanks. So one thing I like about this article is that in fairly short format, it gives us a sort of like a key timeline of important, what I would say kind of like legal milestones that really sort of kind of set the stage or got places like SUNY Oswego thinking about the importance of accessibility. And I think that sort of those initial kind of like legal basis for it, it's a little bit of a catch-22, right? Because while the legal part is important for us to know and understand that there is sort of kind of a formal regulation behind the work that we're trying to do, I think that sometimes or historically, that has given us like a container to think about accessibility in, right? It said, well, this is what the law says. And so we'll do what the law says and we will make sure we're compliant with that. And unfortunately, sometimes when that happens, and I know this just as, you know, my degrees in public policy, and I think about this, right? Like sometimes that unfortunately creates some unintended consequences and where we could create more problems as opposed to kind of getting with the spirit of the law or what we're trying to achieve, which sometimes requires some interpretation, some ability for people to kind of think about the meaning as opposed to the requirements. And while obviously things like the Rehabilitation Act of '73 and the ADA are important for us to be aware of, what I like about this article is that it really helps kind of distill what the meaning or the spirit is behind those things. What should we be thinking about? Why did these laws come to be? Why are there lawsuits around them? And how can we really kind of create a climate or an environment that is proactive and, you know, kind of thinking ahead of what these laws meant versus are just reactive and trying to kind of cover our butts and make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So the idea that I think what we have gotten really good at on campus, and what we're probably all familiar with, even if you haven't thought much about accessibility, is that there is a certain subset of students that register with the Office for Accessibility Services. They are given accommodations, things like extra time on tests, or the ability to take tests in a separate environment. All of those things, like as faculty members, maybe even as students, like we're aware that that kind of approach to accommodations exists on campus. What we may not be thinking quite about is that that requires a fair amount of sort of initiative, and really puts the onus on the students or the individuals with disabilities themselves to identify as a person with a disability, to provide documentation of that. And what we know is that quite often somebody with sort of a qualifying disability doesn't actually go through that whole process at all. And then ultimately they're left in a position where, because they didn't either know how to access those services, or they got frustrated at some point along the way, or they just didn't want to have to disclose again, that they're not getting the kind of assistance or access that they need. So the idea is that there's a lot of things that we can do as campus community members to sort of bypass that need of putting that onus on the individual person with disabilities. And by designing things from the start with this more accessible or inclusive perspective in mind, right? And ultimately, I think that what this article gets across, and what I've learned in my last couple of years working on this, is that when we kind of try and shift that narrative to saying it is all of our responsibilities to build that inclusive environment, that everybody benefits from that. That is not then just something that one individual who's getting one accommodation benefits directly from. That spirit of inclusivity and of accessibility more broadly kind of creates like a more welcoming learning dynamic that can really ultimately help all of us succeed. So, so one of the, let me move myself over here. So if we start kind of shifting our thinking from this idea of like, okay, we have to be worried about legal ramifications and make sure that we're doing the right thing, to instead using a motivation around equity, that gives us sort of a lot to think about when it comes to SUNY Oswego and how we do things here. One of the quotes that I really stuck with me from the article is this idea of a willingness to serve all learners equitably should be at the heart of any accessibility initiative, right? I think if you had been in our earlier session this morning, I think that it is fair to say that we got started down the road of accessibility at Oswego in part in response to some legal ramifications and sort of a lot of scrutiny on institutes of higher learning over the last decade. However, I think that very quickly, you can kind of point to some circumstances and initiatives and ways that we have approached it that didn't just stop at what was required legally. So I'm curious, that has sort of been my perspective as I've started to sort of jump into this pool a little bit. But I'm curious from all of you in your different roles on campus, if this idea of serving learners equitably is something that you feel is part of the climate at Oswego. What other ways have you seen that show up? What examples can you give about your experience of being a part of this community that suggest that we try and serve learners equitably? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yes, we send students over to the Accessibility Resources Office for testing when they've requested it, and provided tests for those particular students. I've walked them over there myself if the professor couldn't take them over there, and try to give them a place where they can take a test that's quieter or with a little bit more time, those sorts of things. So I think we try to help them in that manner.
Anybody else? Thoughts on how we do try and create an equitable environment for all of our learners here? You could also say that you don't think we do, right? If you've got some criticism or some critique about that.
One thing I do, and again, I'm not sure if it's just from, having taught for a long time, but obviously I've changed my modes of instruction and teaching, and I've become much more aware of different students excelling at different types of modalities or whatever the terminology is. So I've broadened to a great extent the types of assessments that I use in order to, with the idea that, some learners are, learn better in different ways, and they can demonstrate their learning or in progress in different ways. So in a way to try to even things out.
Mary, could you give us an example of what might be a broader assessment that you're using?
Well, I just have done more participation in class. I've started using fish bowls with discussions. I've started doing more short writing pieces. Starting to get away from my mindset initially was much more focused on content and giving that content back to me, and more giving the students more opportunity to explain in their own way, or have other students explain to them, important concepts and takeaways from the course. So I don't know if that's what I'm thinking of in terms of it. I know it's kind of a narrow, but that's been my experience. I'm constantly working on trying to find new assessment tools, new ways for the students to demonstrate their mastery. And I find that helpful because I find it broadens the number of students who then demonstrate to me that they are learning. Instead of me, I feel like I got a narrow analysis before.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mary. I think that's a great example.
If I could jump in on that, I think that's cool. I work here, but I'm also a student, and I take classes in the master's program. And my favorite classes are the ones that do allow you to express your learning in different styles. And I had one professor one semester that we did a podcast. We did a screen, it was like a Prezi, but it wasn't. It was like more, we did a paper, we did short tests, we did discussion. So there was all different types of ways of assessing our ability. And also, like, I'm not the best research writer, I do okay. But the fact that I had all these other ways that I could demonstrate my knowledge of the subject area was very helpful. So I think that's very, I think it's great that you're doing that, and that hopefully others are as well.
Thank you, Sharon. And welcome, Sharon and Tammy. We didn't catch you guys in the beginning with our introductions, but thanks for being here. Sharon, just a quick follow-up for you on that. Do you find, you called out one class specifically where you experienced that. Do you find that to be the norm as a student, or do you feel like that was an outlier?
Well, I do think that particular class had more than others. So that one is just like, when I talk about the program to prospective students, I always talk about that particular experience because it did have such a diverse way of showing success. But I think, it depends. It depends on the nature of the course too, right? Some of them are just, you kind of have to be able to write that research paper when you're taking research methods. But I think I found it, a good mixture across the board from most of my classes.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts about, other than assessment in classes, how we try and create an equitable environment here at Oswego?
Also, from the student perspective, a lot of my classes have a lot of flexibility built into them. So like flexibility with deadlines without justification needed, which benefits a lot of different students for different reasons. Maybe they have a disability, they they don't know about or other issues in their life. So it really helps all students, especially during these times.
And thanks for bringing up sort of the context of the moment that we are learning and teaching in, right? I think that actually the past couple of years during the pandemic have really sort of spotlighted this issue, perhaps in a way that wasn't before. I'm going to pull up my slides again, and we're going to jump back to them for just a minute. I think there was something unique, right, about the pandemic itself that helped people sort of understand and recognize the challenges that students were facing, a lot of students were facing, and employees too, were facing every day. One thing, and I'll share a little story with you guys kind of about how I found that the work that I had done towards accessibility wound up benefiting other students during the pandemic. So this photo, this is not a photo of any of my students, by the way, but an experience, and I teach online. I've always taught online. I'm teaching in an MBA program that always has been a fully online program. And many of my students, right, are non-traditional learners that have families, are working full-time, right? And part of my work as an accessibility fellow was to take the lectures that I had developed for one of those classes and make sure that they were all captioned. That was one of the big components of what I was doing. The interesting thing is that I heard after the first couple of semesters during the pandemic from so many of my students how much they appreciated the captions because they were trying to watch lectures in situations like this, right? They've got multiple people doing remote learning. They are in a position where there's just a lot of chaos going on in a small space. And even though they might have earbuds in where they could be listening to me, that captioning allowed focus and attention on the material in a different way, right? I've got some other kind of like amusing anecdotes around this. Pre-pandemic times, I used to always host a pretty big Oscars party at my house. I'm kind of a movie buff, and I would have the Oscars ceremony being showcased in multiple rooms. But when I would have this house full of people, I always had a really big problem hearing who they were announcing as the winner of the different categories. So on at least a couple of the TVs, I put the closed captioning on just so that I could make sure I didn't miss anything. Now, it's important here to recognize that closed captioning on whether it's a TV show or captioning on my videos was not developed as a tool for somebody like me to have a better experience at my Oscars party. It was developed so that persons that have hearing impairments, right, could still engage with the content that we were sharing, whether it's on TV, movies, et cetera, or video lectures. However, I, as a hearing person, was able to still benefit from that tool and resource, right? And I think one thing we forget about is that disability or ability status isn't sort of static or set forever, right? There could be some circumstances where we have a temporary disability or a temporary impairment, or where given the circumstances that we're in, content or material becomes inaccessible to us. And so this next part of the conversation, I'd like to just kind of hear from you, if any of you have kind of similar stories, whether it's related to yourself, your students, experiences during the pandemic, where suddenly roadblocks became clearer to you, or you were able to somehow benefit from some type of an accessible or accessibly made resource or tool. And I will stop the share again so we can chat a little bit. Does anybody have any examples?
Well, I can say for myself, and this isn't pandemic related, but something that I've discovered in general is captioning for me, or having the opportunity to have things either on video or written, is really important, because although I'm not diagnosed with any sort of learning disabilities, I'll just say for me, in the way I work, I want to be able to see things written down so that I can take my time to sort of take in what the message is. I'm constantly in what I do for my job trying to learn, I don't know, new pieces of software, little snippets of code for something that I'm doing. And there are videos for that everywhere. And they go too fast for me. I'm constantly having to pause. I've got to rewind. It doesn't work. So something that has captions, or, you know, a place where I can get something written down, or that has a step-by-step list. Personally, that's just what works. And whether or not I identify as a person with a disability, they're definitely having the different options I find really valuable.
It's a great example, Christine. Thank you. I like this, the idea that you brought up, that it goes beyond just captions as well, right? It's about when we start thinking about kind of that alternative formats or some kind of supplemental or related material, that can really tie into different parts of our brain and help us connect with things differently. It's a great point.
Like Michelle said, I was definitely part of that wave that during the remote learning that I'll just say it, you know, frankly, that I noticed accessibility for the first time and the glaring hole that it was in my course production, because I was putting them fully online for the first time. And so I feel like I learned a lot teaching during the pandemic, but that I struggled to bring what I learned into the classroom. And that's what I view as how I view accessibility is that's one of the things that I'm like unwilling to let go of and that I have to bring fully into the classroom. And so at least how it's helped me the most is just identifying and being flexible with those students who need accommodations, who don't have them through the university. Like just how to like properly identify and handle those situations and do it with grace has been like very beneficial for my students, I think.
Thanks for sharing that, Michael. I think that your point about sensitivity and handling those situations when students either do disclose or recognize that they are having challenge with something. I think even just building this community of people where students or colleagues feel like they can share those things and talk about them is a huge benefit of the culture around accessibility that we're trying to build. Any other examples? I'll give you guys a couple others just to think about as examples of things that perhaps we all may benefit from that might have been not originally designed with us in mind. One example might be if you think about being at the grocery store or Costco and you've got a big, huge cart load of things and not having to push or pull open doors because there are automatic doors that open and close. Those were originally developed with the idea for people in wheelchairs to use. And those, whether it's a sensor or some other kind of format, I think we're all thinking good things about that when our arms are full, but also even again in pandemic times of not having to touch the doors, right? From a public health standpoint of not, spreading germs. I think there's a lot of possible benefits there as well. We've talked a lot about captioning, but something else that participating in the challenge that you're going to hear about is things like accessible emails and making sure that when you are giving somebody a link to go somewhere else, whether it's in an email or on a website or something else that you've designed, that there's a way to do it without having to have the 30 lines of the URL in there, right? And this not only makes your emails look more appealing, but and in many cases more professional, but it also makes it easier for any of us to understand what is the information that I'm getting to if I click on that link. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about that part of it, but the reason why that exists, the ability to get to a link without having to put in an email, the entire kind of text on the URL, is so that if someone who's using a screen reader is reading through that email, then they don't have to read through all those backslashes, colon, et cetera, all of the like jumbled gobbledygook that winds up on the address of a website. I start to notice all kinds of things like this now. As I'm looking for them, I realize that my life is made easier and more efficient in part because somebody was designing something accessibly in a more universal or inclusive manner. So I think that as educators, as peers, as people contributing in this community, it gives us an opportunity to kind of think creatively and to think how we can contribute positively and proactively to those same kinds of solutions. The last point that I want to talk a little bit about from the article is this idea of being proactive instead of reactive, right? One thing I think that is that when it comes to accommodations or getting students connected through accommodations, that is specific and reactive, and it's always after the fact, right? So I might be notified as a faculty member in the first or second week of a class that some student has a specific set of accommodations, and then I need to work, with the Office of Accessibility Resources and scramble and try and get everything up to speed. If I hadn't been working to put captions on my many videos on my class site, then that is something that is not only not going to be timely, but it's going to be done kind of haphazardly. It's not really the most efficient or easiest or approachable way to go about it. So I'm going to third and final time share my screen. So the idea here, right, is that accessibility is kind of us thinking about it before we're asked to accommodate a particular student. It's planning ahead. It's kind of following a set of easy to implement kind of guidelines or practices so that regardless of what students come our way, we have a baseline of accessibility set up for them. And whether that is us as faculty members working with our students, whether that is as students developing materials for a club or organization that we're part of, or as members of the staff or administration who are sending out emails broadly across campus, who are developing website content, any of those things. If we kind of learn the best practices ahead of time, then ultimately we're not kind of in this reactive mode. So I guess the question comes is, why wouldn't we do this? Like, why haven't we been doing this all along? Like, and I'm not gonna put anybody on the spot here, but I'm curious if anybody would like to share kind of what their concerns or fears are around this. Like, what feels like hard or a challenge about it?
Actually, I will speak up. Part of my problem is the technology, associated with it. I have to tell you, I was contacted and it was probably a month into the fall semester. So I will, I assume this is being taped, but I'll say it anyway. I was contacted a month into the fall semester and told that there were a couple of lectures on my online class. And they were PowerPoint lectures, and I had recorded remarks. I was told I needed to provide captions for those. I have to say that a month into the fall semester this year, having come back to campus, I was teaching 5 classes. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. And I had no clue. I'm like, how do I provide captions for PowerPoint slides that I have now recorded lecture and remarks and so I can do extra comments and discussion and now you want captions on it? So that's where I said, you have got to be kidding me. First of all, I had no clue how to do it, but also I thought, I can't believe you're asking me to do this. So that's I apologize for the negativity of it, but it just really annoyed me.
Hey, Mary, I invited it, right? I said, what feels hard? And what I'm hearing is a couple things from you. One, it's just the kind of the frustration or like uncertainty that comes along with being asked to do something you don't know how to do.
Right.
2, you mentioned without mentioning the time right? And just the scarcity of that resource of time, right? That a month into the semester, probably things were happening and obviously you're stretched then. So adding something to your plate, right, feels like it might just tip the scales at that point. And then the third piece, if I was going to kind of put a little spin on it, is feeling like you weren't supported in doing that there wasn't somebody that was going to kind of help you through it or make this easier or more streamlined or make it something that felt achievable or doable. So I think you hit the nail on a bunch of good points there, and don't apologize at all for that.
So it was overwhelming to say the least. But,
Yeah.
And I would have been, I guess too, the other thing was that I had originally, some of these lectures, when I originally created the course, were PowerPoints and they told me to do notes. So I did notes in addition to the PowerPoint. Then what I had done is gone through and taken several of them and decided, you know what, it'd be nicer if the students could hear my voice and hear my more, impromptu and what I consider more valuable conversation about the slides. And now they're telling me, no, that's not good enough. And I'm thinking, to me, as an educator, I thought I had improved the product. And so that was the other issue.
Yeah. Anybody else have any roadblocks that they want to share or things that feel like especially hard or like it's standing in your way on this?
I think that one thing that I come up against is I feel like a lot of times it's very easy for me to grasp the challenges that someone might face if they have a physical disability, but there are so many other ways that messaging I'm trying to deliver, information I'm trying to convey, or for the teachers in the room, right, what they're trying to instruct that are challenging for different people in different ways. And so sometimes I kind of will, we're very lucky in the graduate studies office that we have Rebecca Mushter as our associate dean. And so she's helped us a lot with moving forward on the accessibility front. But sometimes I'll say to her, like, kind of what else is there that I wouldn't think about that's a disability or that provides an accessibility issue? Like I don't know all the things.
Thanks, Christine. I'll share one of my roadblocks that I just ran into this week. And what I think is that, and this is like, I'm gonna, again, on recording, disclose this, but I think that inertia is a little bit of a problem, right? Like where it's real easy from semester to semester to copy a course over and know that it's, parts of it should just be good enough as they are. However, I was in one of my courses trying to upload a revised syllabus and a course calendar and kind of all of those main structural documents. And when I was updating my class in Blackboard, I couldn't get these Word documents to re-upload. And I knew, like, to me, they were documents I had made accessible. They were like, fine. There was nothing wrong with them. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Anyway, as it turns out, the guidance that I was given was to convert that into a PDF, upload it. One thing I know is that PDFs in this particular case would be less accessible than the Word document that I had. So I didn't love that plan. One thing I had been interested in doing since I've been an accessibility fellow was converting these documents to Google Docs and using their kind of accessibility features and just putting links into my Blackboard. But that's just like anything else, like more work to do to convert documents that were already like in good shape in my perspective. So I finally kind of had enough of a impetus kind of thrown in my way to say like, okay, you're not able to do it the way that you want to do it. Also, you've been kind of had this idea in the back of your mind for a while. Now's the time. And so there's some kind of degree of having enough motivation that I think it's important, right? Like you got to get yourself over that hump of like, I'm just going to do things the way I know how versus I'm going to start to learn something new to do it in a way that I think, even if I was motivated, might be the better way. we're all busy, right? Like we've got a lot to do to whether prepare to teach courses, to take courses, to do the extracurricular service work that we're doing. And so sometimes it's hard to kind of pause and just take that moment to sort of switch our perspectives and our thinking. Any final kind of thoughts anyone wants to share about things that they are worried about when they're kind of taking this on or getting underway with the idea of creating more accessibility in your work?
Michelle, I was just going to kind of build on the previous topic and add one of the difficulties I have in the science field, particularly in chemistry, is that there is a relatively well accepted way to handle mathematical notation. It's not universal, but it's pretty broadly accepted. There are a few different ways to handle chemical notation. None of them are broadly known and none of them are broadly accepted. So really, we don't have in the discipline a clear way forward that's universal that we can just sort of deploy. And so we're stuck.
Yeah, that's a great example. Casey, I think we found that recently with some of our recent fellows who teach in the music department, who teach in foreign languages, where there's a whole new set of sort of challenges and roadblocks that we're uncovering along the way that we weren't anticipating. And so it feels like, in addition to kind of like all the other roadblocks that everybody's dealing with, you've highlighted some really good sort of unique challenges that are discipline specific that that we feel like we have to sort of be pioneers on, right? Yeah. Well, I commend everybody for even kind of starting to think about this, taking the steps of participating in the challenge, because that means that you got past the first roadblock, right? Which is just, this is something I'm interested in. This is something I want to learn more about. Casey talks about this and did earlier as like just taking some baby steps. I think what you'll find is that the more you participate in these sessions, challenges, or talking to each other, it's going to feel like there's so much to do. And really, you have to focus on kind of taking a bite that makes sense to you and being able to really just start to make some headway in something. That progress is important. And if it's incremental and it's moving in the right direction, then to me, that's what this challenge is all about, getting us each to move a little bit further past where we were. I still today, Mary, have videos that are not fully captioned. I'm going to say it, right? A lot of mine are, but we're still, kind of getting there. So if you were to start to think about all, 5 classes you teach a semester, how many semesters a year, and it's a lot of material. So we each need to be thinking about like, what can we learn? What can we do slightly differently to start making small impacts while still maintaining sanity, right? So I want to encourage you, we only have a couple minutes left. I want to remind everybody that right after this at 2:00 and every day during the challenge at 2:00, we have our drop-in sessions. And these are times for you to bring materials that you're working on. Mary, if you wanted to show up with one of your videos, like we could go through and help you do the captions on it. If you have, images, a PDF, something like that you're working on or that you start playing around with over the next week and you run into some roadblocks on that, that is treated as like a work session. So we are there for you. We are happy to kind of sit in those times and really dig into it with you. We can share screen. We've used breakout rooms, all kinds of things like that. So please take advantage of those, everybody, if that is something that is interesting to you. And finally, if you're not part of the challenge, but you just happen to show up today, please feel free to keep attending our sessions and use any of the resources available to you on the accessibility website. Contact myself, Casey, any of us in the work group that can kind of help you out along the way. Does anybody have any final questions or thoughts before we wrap up for this session? All right. Well, it was great to see you all. Thanks for your contributions and for the discussion. Look forward to seeing you the rest of the week during the challenge. Take care.